Good morning everyone, I'm Martina Russo and today I'm going to present you one of the first results of the BCQ research project entitled Morphological System of Open Spaces in Built Environment Prone to Sudden Onset Disasters. The present work is part of an Italian PRIN project of relevant national interest entitled Be Secure, Built Environment Safer in Slow and Emergency Conditions through Behavioral Assessed Design Resilient Solution, supported by MUR, the Italian Ministry of Education, University and Research. The Be Secure research project intends to develop methods, tools and guidelines to assess the built environment resilience, promote risk mitigation strategies design, and increase urban risk awareness by using a holistic, user-centered and cross-hazard approach. The research focuses on built environment intended as building infrastructure open spaces interfaces. Built environment can be affected by significant risk increasing conditions and have a prior role in determining the resilience of urban space and their users. Focusing only on sudden onset disasters as defined by the World Health Organization, the paper is oriented towards understanding what are the morphological characteristics of built environment that can most influence the possibility of reducing the number of people seriously involved in a disastrous event, considering especially the impact of earthquake and terroristic attacks. This research is structured in three parts. Literature review to define type of open space that could play a role in disaster resilience, the identification of the morphological system in the historical urban fabric mainly involved in the safety of the population and in the reduction of disaster risk, a proposal for classification of open spaces in relation of the risk. The effect of sudden onset disasters is influenced by the characteristic of the built environment and the user presence, especially while referring to the historical urban areas that are characterized by a variety of complex factors, such as population density, construction agent techniques, and morphological configuration of the open spaces. In this framework, the morphology of the built environment is therefore a critical factor for evaluating the resilience of urban settlement. In the literature, the morphology of the built environment has been studied from different points of view. From a spatial analytical point of view, we can find in literature the approach followed by Lynch, Patti and Hillier. Among them, Lynch identifies 6 distinct aspects to define the built environment form in urban area: physical form, use activity movement, control, perception, continuity change, movement or flow of material and information. The typological approach to urban morphology is rooted in the work of Muratori, Caniggia and Maffei. They studied the built environment focusing on its structure and on the historical process of its development. Finally, the historical geographical approach to urban morphology is well summarized by the work of Konzen. His town plan analysis considers 5 aspects: site, function, townscape, social and economic context, and development. It distinguishes 3 form complexes: street system, street block, and block plans. The link between these different approaches highlights at least 4 main aspects: spatial relationship of physical features, interrelation between human and physical features, flows, formation, transformation, cyclical change. In this literature framework, the research aims to propose an updated classification of built environment, starting from a preliminary identification of 2 main morphological systems: areal spaces and linear spaces. Areal spaces are defined as open spaces of public use enclosed partially or completely by constructions, located at the intersection of streets or along main roads, with various urban functions. Square, parks and parking are examples of areal spaces. A significant research about typological analysis of square was conducted by Mandolesi and Ferrero that studied and classified all the 165 squares of the Italian area of Piceno, grouping them in 12 main spatial types. Linear spaces are defined as open spaces of public use composing the link in the urban fabric, where people and vehicles can move equipped with roadbed and flooring. Street, roads and paths are examples of linear spaces, linking area spaces and forming the urban network. Comparing different classifications of roads found in literature based on morphological and functional aspects, the authors consider the region of Hamilton-Wentworth classification system as the most suitable classification for the European urban context of historical cities and for the global aims of the research project. This classification system is the result of wide transportation study and reported 5 types of linear spaces: passage, traditional street, main street, gateway and mobility street. In literature, it is also possible to find some research that link the morphological approach with the vulnerability of an historical urban area. Among them, Olivieri has identified several indicators related to buildings and roads morphology for the vulnerability assessment of Nocera Umbra. As a result of this research, the authors have accomplished a morphological classification of both area spaces and linear spaces in relation to sudden onset disaster risk. For the areal spaces, 6 main categories was identified, comparing the classification of the analyzed literature with the criteria for expedition evaluation of urban vulnerability and emergency limit condition and escape route assessment. The tending to quadrangle category has no prevalent dimension in the planimetric development. The effect is the proximity of people to the emergency escape routes. For this reason, we consider the tending to quadrangle and the regular shapes of Mandolesi's classification in only one category. The elongated with parallel size group has a prevalent dimension in the planimetric development and size that can be considered parallel. There is no constant distances between people in the square and escape routes. The tending to triangular and funnel-shaped class has the problem of the funnel effect that could lead to the concentration of the people in the direction of narrowing. For this reason, we consider both the triangular and the funnel-shaped of Mandolesi's classification in this category. Additionally, this morphological type has problem of the overlapping of the overturned fronts, where there is the acute angle in the plan. The trapezoidal and polygonal group represent particularly articulated spaces with a centric conformation in which we can have a multitude of escape routes. The tending to circular, ovoid and ellipsoid category has no polygonal fronts, and the location of escape routes can be different case by case. Finally, the last class, the composite one, is characterized by complex shape composed by the combination of the previous types. For the linear spaces, 4 main categories was identified, starting primarily from the region of Hamilton-Wentworth classification and its definitions, but considering the gateway and the mobility streets as only one category. The proposed classification is specifically related to the built environment of historical town and include the passage, the traditional street, the main street, the gateway mobility street. The morphotypological characteristics of linear spaces is strictly related to the crowding level. Considering the seismic events, the dimension of the streets, their geometric features, and the presence of obstacles along them have an impact on the capacity of the escape route. Considering the terroristic attacks, it is relevant also the type of crowding and the special uses of the building along the open spaces. According with the principle of the maximization of the disastrous effects, it is essential to evaluate the risk in terms of loss of lives and media relevance of the attack. For this reason, the classification of the linear spaces was mainly influenced by the relationship between users, geometry of the open spaces and their use. In conclusion, the classification of the built environment proposed by the authors highlights how the morphological features of open spaces in built environment affect the performance of the overall system in terms of seismic and terroristic risk. considers and illustrates the different characteristics of aerial spaces and linear spaces in relation to safety and evacuation, contributes to the evaluation of the security level of the historical urban areas common to Italian and European context. Thank you all for your attention.